I asked Sadhguru a question, and his response was, come do 40 days in silence. Be careful what you ask for. It can be brutal. And you look at this yantra, unblinking. The bell dings, you close your eyes, that's the last thing you see, and you go to sleep. Instead of a dream, say a dream is a 2-hour movie. It's like you're watching it on 360X, right? So it takes 20 seconds. We're sitting around at a dinner with him. I'm sitting next to him. For me, it was like sitting next to this generator, like humming. This lady is just like, Joshua, how is silence? In my mind, I think, this guy, 3 lifetimes, right? What are my 5 days? They're nothing. And I kind of look over and there's this giant, I'll say smoke being, but that's the only way I could do it. But I have this understanding that I'm sitting there talking to the spirit of the ayahuasca plant. And I kid you not, it says, don't come back.
I am aware that you have been to Kailash with Sadhguru. I know that you joined the Anadi program in 2010. I'm aware that you've been through the Isha Hatha Yoga Teachers Training, and you also been recently to the Mystic Musings in Bali with Sadhguru.
Yeah.
So I think what would be interesting is to hear how you first stumbled across Sadhguru, especially when meditation and yoga was not really a thing and probably not really accepted by people. That would be, I think, a good point to start.
Lovely. So I'll just kind of start, as they say, in media res, because I don't know where a good starting point is. But I came across Sadhguru in 2008. Yoga was basically just studio yoga at that point. It was women in tight pants and that sort of stuff, and it was California based, and a couple people had gone to India and come back, but there wasn't any sense of yoga in a larger context as it is now, as a way of life or bringing spirituality and development into your own life. So I had taken a few yoga classes. I was a triathlete. I was actually racing Ironmans professionally, but at like a minor league level. I was getting a little bit of money from it, not enough to survive. I was pushing my body like crazy. During that time also, I wasn't able to sleep. So I would have weekends where I would do stuff like get up in the morning, ride my bike from 6 till noon, and then come home, rest a little bit, go running in the evening for an hour or two, and then I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I'd get to bed at 9 and know I got a 3 or 4 hour run tomorrow, but I wouldn't be able to sleep. So my body slowly broke down. Mentally, I was in a rough place. If you only get 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night anyway, it leads to some problems. But then if you're doing that on top of trying to push your body to those extremes, those problems are exponentially higher. So I started looking for different stuff. I was raised Christian. I went to church every week, that sort of stuff. It didn't really add up in terms of, I'd pray about my problems. I'd try to figure out my problems. I would put it on God, that sort of stuff. And nothing really happened. Nobody answered. Nobody, that sort of stuff. I know people talk about these huge experiences when they pray, and all I got was more, not more insomnia as a result of the praying, but it wasn't solutions based. So I started looking into other things. I did a bit of self-realization fellowship, which is Paramhamsa Yogananda's group, which was beautiful, but it didn't really have an impact in the sense of it seemed a lot more theoretical than applicable. I tried a couple of different things, read a whole bunch. Actually ended up reading this book called wasn't the Four Agreements. It was by Alberto Villoldo. He's into shamanism and energy healing. I went and took an energy healing course, and I had this big experience, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is amazing. So I actually moved out to Park City, where these people were located, maybe still are located. This was around 2008. I went into their light body healing course, where you're learning to do energy healing, you're learning to work within their paradigm. I had some experiences. I still can't really quantify what happened. We did the death rites at one point, and they supposedly throw your energy body out and you travel around. And I had some wild experience of me traveling around the earth and, these things.
Was that like a drum circle, or how did they...
It wasn't a drum circle. It was a group of people who are in this kind of shamanic initiation type thing that We're supposed to be learning how
Mm.
to do it and learning how to heal. So I was like, this is amazing. I don't know if you've read anything by Carlos Castaneda, but he said, whatever path you choose a path with heart. And I was like, oh, this is something that there seems like there's something there. We can be helping people. We can be doing that. So I started actually practicing some energy healing. Went down to the jungle and did ayahuasca. And the first time I went down to the jungle and did ayahuasca, it was for 4 nights. It was just this, it's intense. You know about ayahuasca and you've read or
Yeah, yeah.
done? Okay.
No, no, not done. Heard about it. I was actually in Colombia and I met a lot of people who did it. And then
Mm-hmm.
hearing their experiences, I was kind of hesitant if I should jump into it because some people were more confused than before. And for some people, it was way too much. And I think it was also a spiritual bypass. I felt that people were more into the experience rather than taking it as something that they will carry on with the way of living or the way of perceiving things. It was more just a situation, a moment, but it didn't necessarily lead to a change in their day-to-day life. So that made me feel hesitant about it. But in general, I think that there are a lot of natural medicines that are out there that shamans are using that can definitely help.
Your statements are interesting because they kind of dovetail into where my story is going. So I went down and I had this very large experience. Ayahuasca is kind of puts you through the grinder quite a bit, but over those 4 days, it seemed like everything changed. If we have another one, I can actually get into the full 4 days because it's quite an intense experience. But I got done and I was like, oh, everything's different. I see my life in a different way. I see the way the world is in a different way. I can see how I grew up. And then I come home and similar to what you said, very quickly you're falling back into the old patterns. Very quickly you're realizing that just because you have some insight or some experience, it doesn't mean that your life has changed. I was dating a girl at the time and we were just kind of fighting all the time. It was one of those relationships where there's a lot of acrimony, things that didn't need to be thought about were thought about. And I thought, oh, okay, I changed myself. Sort of the Rumi thing of when I was young, I was a fool, so I tried to change the world. Now that I'm older, I'm wise and I changed myself. I think I'm paraphrasing that, but the point still stands. So I got home and I had this huge experience, but I fell back into my life and very quickly I found myself sharing this experience. I'm like, let me tell you. And there's nothing more obnoxious than somebody who's had some experience and can't stop talking about it. So we decided to go back this time with the girlfriend and then travel around Cusco for a while. And so, interestingly enough, in Park City, in a bookstore in Park City, there was this book called Midnights with the Mystic. Now, it's written by a guy named Sadhguru and a lady named Cheryl Simone. But the foreword is by this fellow, Richard Vogt. If you've read, what's that book? Eat, Pray, Love. He plays a large role in Eat, Pray, Love. He is actually Richard from Texas. The girl I was dating was just obsessed with Eat, Pray, Love. Every time she had a couple of glasses of wine, she would start telling me about Elizabeth Gilbert's story and how she just in this detail. And I'm like, don't buy this book. I don't need anything more about Eat, Pray, Love in my life. I just have to hear it enough. So I'm actively trying to dissuade her from buying this book, Midnights with the Mystic. Well, as you can probably tell by our relationship, I think that made her buy it. So she buys the book. We go to do ayahuasca and we were doing 3 nights with this group. And the first night, I just had this, I guess it was similar to the other experiences before. The second night, one of the weird things about ayahuasca is the more you do it, the less you need to go on the journey. So the first time I did it, I think I took 3 cups. By this night, which was the 6th night, I was like, I'll just take a half a cup. So I took this half a cup and it was like the veils just parted. I could see exactly what was going on. They see these songs. They sing, or the ayahuasca, the shaman sings these songs. He has this pipe and you'll be sitting there having this experience and you look in over the fire, he's sitting there and there's this little cherry and it's like lit. He's just staring at you, like sucking this stuff out of you and then blows it out, and you're like, oh, I feel better. So I started to see, like, talk about seeing the matrix. I could see how all of it worked. I could understand how the music played. I could do all that. And then usually the trips last 4.5 hours, 4 to 4.5 hours. So you start at 8, it's midnight, and then you go back and you sleep. And a weird thing about ayahuasca too is you wake up the next morning feeling amazing. It's not like other drugs where you're just like, oh, that hurt and stuff like that. You wake up I shouldn't say it across the line. I would wake up feeling just like you're purged. Part of it is vomiting, part of it is the other way. This was like, it was 2:30. I was going on 6.5 hours, and I am just in this euphoric state. The shaman finally comes over and he says, time for bed. It's like, okay. And he looks at me and goes, tomorrow night, you help with the ceremony. I kind of gave him this look. And he goes, no, you help. I teach you. So I went home just on this euphoric high, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and I'm just like, okay, tomorrow I start my journey to being an ayahuasca shaman. And so I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and the sun is coming up, and it's this like indigo sky, and then I'm hearing, and I look, and there's this branch silhouetted, and this one little monkey runs to the end, and then it jumps. Then I hear, and then the second little monkey runs to the end. And so the girl I'm seeing at the top, I'm like, hey, is this happening? And she looks at me, she goes, yes, go the F to sleep. And so I go to sleep, I wake up the next day, I'm feeling great the next day. So the next night, I was just like, I'm just gonna have a sip of this stuff and start my journey in the next phase of my life. I'm gonna learn how to do it, I'm gonna do all this sort of stuff. It's beautiful, it's a path with heart. So I take this sip of this stuff, and I am laid flat on my mat. And I'm just laid there flat on my mat, and I was like unable to move. And then all of a sudden I'm 30 feet from there, and I can look over and see my body. I can look over and see the entire ceremony happening. I remember there's this guy that had his mat, and he had it pulled up to here, and he's walking around. Later he told me he thought he was a crab. So I can see this going on, and I can just see the shaman looking at me like, hey, we're supposed to be doing this thing. And I kind of look over, and there's this giant, I'll say smoke being, but that's the only way I could do it. And I have this realization that, like, I'm sitting there with, this is all strange. I still don't know how to conceptualize what happened, but I have this understanding that I'm sitting there talking to the spirit of the ayahuasca plant, right? Like each ayahuasca works with a different incarnation. Our shaman worked with Dr. Ayahuasca. So I sit there and I'm like, okay, cool. I ask it all these questions, and it's answering them, like question after question after question. So this goes on for maybe 2 hours or something like that. And I'm sitting there just, this is amazing. I'm connecting with something. And then at the end of it, I'm like, thank you so much. I can't wait to come down here and do this. And I kid you not, it says, this isn't your path. These states are accessible without drugs. Don't come back. Right? And I don't know what experience, you never hear a cocaine addict saying, cocaine told me not to do cocaine. You never hear someone who smokes a lot of weed be like, yeah, in between Doritos that I'm eating, I don't want to be smoking pot anymore. So I was just, but that's pretty clear. So we finish, and I wake up the next morning, and I'm just, what the hell just happened, right? What is going on? I got kicked out of the garden. I found something that's real. I connected with something, and now I'm out. But I start noticing things, like the guy who brought us down there, he's been coming for 25 years. He's bickering constantly with his soon-to-be 6th wife. And not from a place of judgment, but and looking at all these people who have been doing this a long time, and similar to what you said, I realized this hasn't solved their problems, right? Like, they can have a big experience, but they're dependent on the circle. They're dependent on the Amazon. They're dependent on the fire. They're dependent on their environment to have these experiences. And that's not sustainable. Like, you come down from the high. You are no longer able to be immersed in that. So then all you have are things that you talk about, like experiences that you talk about, something that was not a living reality for you. And I just started noticing, like, this was stuff that we were supposed to be doing to heal the world, that people were charging $400 for an energy healing session. What's that about? Like, if we're supposed to heal the world, if the world's in this dire peril that we need to heal the world, we should be going and offering this free. We should be doing it for everybody. We should be working towards a different way of being rather than being immersed in the same capitalistic paradigm of, hey, you need my help. You want to learn Surya Kriya? Well, that's $250 no matter whether you have it or not. So for me, like a seeker, somebody who really wants to change, you should offer it. Yes, it's important to, make money and survive, but that shouldn't be why you're doing it. And so I just started noticing all these little flaws, all these little things. I actually got really, really depressed. I went from this mountaintop all the way down to here, and I was just like, I don't know if anything is real. And we were in Cusco, we were going through the mountains of Cusco, and I had this moment where I broke down, and I was like, I'm done. I'm done fighting with life. I'm done struggling to survive. I'm done with all of this. If there's anything real, it needs to happen now. Because I was still not sleeping well. I was in a relationship that I thought was one of love and with this new person who was on the same path as I was, and we were just bickering all the time. And so I was like, okay, if something has to happen, it has to happen now because I'm done. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, okay, well, there's nothing that's real. And I started making plans, and I was like, okay, well, it's kind of time to end it. I've been miserable my whole life. It's time to just end it. And so I started making plans. I knew where I was going to do it. I was going to go home. I was going to wrap things up financially, leave in a place where they could find the body. And I was just calmly, rationally going through how I was going to end things. And we were on this bus ride. It was about 6 hours. I was reading a book to pass the time. I finished my book. I asked around. Nobody had books. The only person who had a book.
So you were thinking about suicide? Is it?
Oh no, I wasn't thinking about it. I was committed to it. I was just done. Yeah, no. It was not a thought anymore. It was something that I had considered as option here and there when things got really bad. But at this point, I was like, I'm done. Everything just kind of leads to the same shallow depth, right? And there's nothing that can fix you on a large level. Like, there's nothing to handle the human condition. I'm miserable. I can have these experiences, but I come back to me being miserable. I can have these experiences. I come back to being sleepy. I come back to my body hurting. I come back to all that sort of stuff. Like, I was in quite the state. And I just made that decision. I was like, I'm done, right? I'm not fighting this anymore. I don't want to be alive. So in that state of mind, we're traveling on a 6-hour bus ride, and I finished my book. Michael Pollan book, quite good book. It's funny, Safe Soil's coming out, and I'm like, for me, this is 15 years later that I realized that we have to change our agricultural and our food source. But it's great. It's wonderful that it's happening on a global scale now. The only book that we had 4 hours left was Midnights with the Mystic, which I begrudgingly accepted. I was like, okay, I'll read this thing. And even reading the beginning, I love Richard. Richard's a great guy. I actually got to know him quite well. But reading the beginning, I was like, okay, it's another one of these things. But then I read this book, and it was interesting because it's not stuff that I hadn't heard. A lot of it was stuff that I had read, but for some reason, Sadhguru talking about it, it seemed like someone for whom this was real. It didn't seem like he was talking about theory. It didn't seem like he was talking about, something that he had learned from somebody. He seemed to have some experience of whatever that it is that makes life worth living. I'd love to say I had this, Paul on the road to Damascus moment where the scales fell from my eyes, and but I looked at it, and when we got back to the hotel, I looked it up and I saw something. I was like, okay, there's a class in LA 6 weeks from now. Okay, I'll take that. Who cares if it was the middle of July, or I guess it was beginning of July, end of June. It's like, who cares if I kill myself in September instead of beginning of August? I'll wait, take that class, see if anything's there.
Sure.
Actually, we went through the whole class. It was not with Sadhguru. It was, as I think they had just started in the US offering classes via teachers. I was like, okay, this is interesting. It was interesting. And then initiation day happened. During Shambhavi initiation, I had some kind of crazy experience where it was very, very similar to an ayahuasca trip. Much shorter, but the intensity and all that sort of stuff was similar. And so, long story long, that's how I came across Sadhguru.
So what the ayahuasca told you?
I mean, it's weird to think about it in those terms, isn't it? It's like weird to quantify it and say this led to this, led to this, but I look back and that's what seems to have happened, is that it said that there's another way. And then you have that moment where you break down, right? You have that moment where you hit rock bottom and you're just, whatever it is, you're done with living life the way you're living. You realize that it's a grind, it's untenable. For me, there was nothing that brought me joy. And I just said, you know, in a certain sense, the student is ready, right? Like whatever it takes, then the master appears. That's the old saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I still have no idea what exactly to make of that story because it seems very outlandish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
It does. That's why I think that's why I was like, it's a wild story. But so that was 2008. So I took inner engineering in 2008. And then I did BSP, the first BSP in Mahima in 2000, like 2 months later. I actually ended up going to India for Samyama in January.
So BSP was the first time you met Sadhguru?
Yes, the first time I sat in front of him, yeah, I was at BSP. I think at that point there were about 200 of us, and he was still conducting the BSPs in person.
So about 200 people who were doing the program, plus volunteers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mahima had just been consecrated, I think, the week before.
Oh, okay. Were you there for the consecration, or you were not so involved?
So I was up there. I was helping to get everything ready for it, but I was not part of consecration. My grandmother had died, and so I had to miss consecration. I was going to be up there for it, but then she passed away, and so I had to miss consecration.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful in that sense for me to hear that your family member passing away, you being there for your family was as important, or if not more important, than attending consecration. Because sometimes I hear the story of a husband whose wife was pregnant and she had her water come out and she had to go to the hospital, but he said, I have to do my Shambhavi before. So he put his practice over her delivery of her child, and certain people were celebrating him. Wow, you are such a big devotee. You are committing to your practices more than a baby. And I was like, this is ridiculous. You're so anti-life, the way that you're celebrating this commitment. So I'm happy to hear that you put family members' death as something important for you to process.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at it and say, we don't have the capacity to judge what somebody else's choices are. If it were me, I would probably, were I married and had a baby on the way, I would probably bring the wife and the baby to the hospital and then do my Shambhavi. You know, make sure that they're taken care of and then find a place, you know, go sit outside and do my Shambhavi. Because you have to, I don't know, like I can't, maybe that is what is necessary, maybe that's not, but you can't forget your humanity in chasing divinity, right? Like you have somebody who's hurting her in trouble in front of you and you're saying, well, I'm just going to close my eyes and do that. And maybe there is something like Buddha left his wife and child to go pursue the path. And there's all sorts of questions, but that's, this is getting into judgment, but if you are somebody who has learned Shambhavi and has chosen to have a wife and a child, right? You haven't, it's different versus somebody who has been all of a sudden taken with something. So it's nuanced. I can't lay anything like, yes, maybe, okay, wonderful, he's doing the path, or wonderful, he's doing that. But even during Anadi, or prior to Anadi, one of the guys showed up for the pre-Anadi meet, and Sadhguru basically looks at him, he's like, does your wife know you're here? And he's like, you know, does this, and he's like, I won't say the guy's name, but the guy is the sweetest, most devotional guy ever. It's like, Guru looks at him, he's like, not like this, don't approach it like this. There's a certain sense of your obligations that you've committed to, your stuff that you've done. I mean, for lack of a better word, that's our karma. That's something that we have done. You have a child, you have a commitment you've made to say, well, this is now suddenly the most important part of my life, versus saying, I need to handle that with grace. I need to handle my commitments with grace. I need to handle everything with grace. I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. It might be right, it might be wrong.
I agree with what you said, but I agree as well that the judgment should not be there. I just recently saw this. The judgment is basically the judgment of ourselves and the judgment of others is what keeps you in that loop, what is actually making you fall into the trap of right and wrong, good and bad, and that's what keeps you in the loop of karma. So as long as you don't transcend the judgment, you will be stuck in that karma. And now that you mentioned the Anadi program, and karma was pretty big, or dissolving of karma was a large topic during that. Just to give some context, this was in 2010, a 3 months program with 200 participants who were spending in Sadhguru's presence. And yeah, just about this 3 months in a consecrated space with 200 people who are committed to the same path. How was that experience for you? 3 months with Sadhguru, 3 months in a consecrated space.
It's weird looking back on it, because it's easy to look back and talk about all the beautiful, amazing, or we watched videos during Hatha Yoga teacher training, and to watch those and realize, you see the cool moments, you see all that sort of stuff, but you don't see, the first 2 weeks it was freezing, and the walls of Mahima were not down, so we were in open air, and it was like brutally cold, and then there weren't enough volunteers, and so we realized later that there were 6 people making food for 220 of us, and the food was just horrendous. The food was bad. Once it got warm, the heat was awful. The Tennessee in the summer, the bugs, like flies, and we would have these little fly strips where it has the sticky paper on it, and the flies would go, and you'd be doing your practices, and and you're just like so consciously aware that there are 15 creatures there dying, right? They're dying on trying to fly away. All that being said, like sitting there with him and the intimacy that was there and the way he was with us, I don't think I've ever seen, like, you can see it in the Anadi videos. You can see it in that, where it's the way he is with us. It's basically like we're family, we're children. He's brought us and sat us on his lap, and is in that. And it was doing all that sadhana, being a part of it. It was, I don't know. It's just, we'll get a couple of us will get together at times. We'll see each other and we'll just kind of sit and talk about it, because we still don't know how to conceptualize what exactly it was we went through, what it was, because we even have a different practice.
Right? I'm aware. Yeah. I talked to a Swami who told me that he's not doing shunya. He's doing some other practice which is not similar, but something which, so he cannot do shunya.
That was a Swami? That was a Swami that said that?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if the ones... I didn't know if the Swamis kept up their Anadi practices or not. But yes, we got initiated into a practice, one of those ones where we're not really supposed to utter the words, but I think it's in Mystics and Mistakes. Like, it's actually written down, so you can a couple of people know the name of it. It's either in Mystics or Mistakes or one of Sadhguru's books. He talks about the Anadi and he talks about the practice. And so we don't do Shambhavi, we don't do Shakti. There's a couple of people who do Shakti for health reasons. And then we don't do any of the chanting. We have a specific chant that we chant. We don't do any of the Samyama practices. We basically got this practice. And
so you were initiated into Shambhavi before, but you dropped.
Yeah, we were initiated into all of the practices, and we actually had a samyama during Anadi that culminated we got initiated into the samyama practices on Guru Purnima in 2010. And I remember one of the beautiful memories of this is we're out in the Mahima garden and the full moon's up, and we are doing our samyama practice on the full moon. And Sadhguru and one of the singers are in there singing Chandra Jivan, and it was just this ethereal, beautiful, transcendental moment that just stuck out to me.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But it was very difficult in some ways.
Yeah, he said that in the videos. He said in the videos that he kept you guys on. He didn't want you to settle. He didn't want you to feel comfortable. When he saw you guys sleeping in the hall and you were sleeping in peace, he said he doesn't want you to be in peace. So that's why he set up the dream yantra.
Okay, yeah. Well, in the dream yantra, he also said that what our practice does is, about the sanchita and the prabdha karma.
Yeah.
Yes, so prabdha is this lifetime, sanchita is like the big warehouse that is the storage of all the karma. So what he says is it actually concentrates the sanchita karma and then works it out, right? So you're taking the whole warehouse of stuff, concentrating it and working out in a small amount of time. And I mean, small amount of time can be 10, 15 years versus 10,000 years would be. So small is relative in that sense. It didn't feel small for me for a lot of the time while I was going through it, but small is definitely relative. But so the dream yantra, what he said is he wants us to work out some of our karma during our sleep, because if we got initiated into our practice without that happening, it would crush us. And so it was a really, so he put together that dream yantra. You can see it behind him in some of the talks. It's got a picture of Sadhguru in the middle, and it's got all this drawings on the outside. And somebody said recently at some darshan that he had talked about making small dream yantras for people.
Yeah.
Did he? Okay, yeah, he talked about that during Anadi. So what he says is it allows you to kind of speed everything up and work it out in your sleep.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we go to bed, usually at night from about 6 p.m. till 10 or 10:30 p.m. We'd have satsang with him. And then we'd go eat. And then, brush teeth, whatever it is, get to bed at, say, 11:15. But then you sit on your mat and you look at this yantra unblinking for, I don't remember the time, but it was something like 11 minutes. So they'd have a bell, ding. And 11 minutes later, the bell would ring, ding. So you're supposed to sit up there, gaze at it, unblinking for that period of time. The bell dings, you close your eyes, that's the last thing you see, and you go to sleep. Which led to some interesting things, because you're supposed to look at it unblinking, unbroken, but I get into bed at 11:10, and somebody walks across at 11:20, and I'm almost done, but they break it. I'm supposed to start it over. So you get this weird thing where we're in silence, but somebody's walking across, and you're like clapping. People are clapping at them and doing this sort of stuff. You'd think that being there and in silence, everybody's kind of, everybody was agitated at that point. Everybody, people were irritated at people were doing all sorts of weird stuff. But so, you go to sleep, and it's like if you're watching, instead of a dream, say a dream is a 2-hour movie, it's like you're watching it on 30x. And so it takes about, maybe more than that, maybe like 2-hour movie would be 120 minutes, so maybe 360x, right? So it takes 20 seconds, and then you switch to another one. So you just basically have this weird concept of a dream, and then you wake up and you just feel like, for me, I'd wake up, I feel like I ran a marathon.
Yeah.
You wake up and you're just kind of like, what is going on here? And so this went on. I have trouble remembering exactly when in the program things went on. Like, so much happened that when I'm trying to figure out what went where. But we went on for a period, and then they split us into groups. And so we had a sun group, a moon group, and an earth group. And what Sadhguru said is, and whenever I'm saying what Sadhguru said on this is my recollection. I could get it wrong. I could 100% be misquoting. So put those right here. Those are on me. So as I recall, I should be saying, what Sadhguru said is that it's based on how our system functions. So some people have like a 24-hour cycle that their system goes through. Those are the earth people. Some people have, a 28-day cycle that the system goes through. Those are the moon people, and some people's have like this long 12.5-year cycle. Those are the sun people. And I don't know, I think it's different than what he talks about with our karmic cycles, because the karmic cycles are the ones that he talks about. You can do Surya, Kriya, and change. And the way he's talked about it, if I remember right, it seems somehow different. It seems to not be necessarily like our karmic cycles, but that somebody's attention and stuff like that is more all over the place. They're a little bit more flighty. And so that's like the earth person, whereas somebody is kind of flows. That's the moon person. And somebody is just steady. That's the sun person. That's how I understand it, because I've heard him talk about various different things. So we got split into these groups and then initiated.
And after the initiation, you were instructed that you are not doing Shambhavi anymore or Shunya anymore, and now this is your practice.
And a couple of interesting things happened. So we did our practice. Goodness, I feel like we got initiated about. See, like these times I don't have exactly. I can't remember. We got initiated maybe day 60, somewhere in there, so 2/3 of the way through, and then we did our practice, and towards the end of it, Sadhguru said, now's the time to make the decision. You either stick to this practice or you go back. I remember there were a couple people who went back. One thing to know is this practice, Hatha is mandatory, he told us. Like, you have to do Hatha, because this practice doesn't build up our system. This practice actually is negative to your health. It takes a toll on the body, it takes a toll on the system. So you have to do the Hatha to stabilize your body and keep it up. And you'd see people who, I don't like to make these one-to-one things, but there were people that got sick. There were people that things happened physically. There were people that had medical stuff happen. And a lot of times you talk to them and they'd be like, well, I'm not really doing my Hatha, or they're having mental stuff happen. They're like, yeah, I'm not really doing my Hatha. So for me, dealing with the madness that came after, like, Hatha was the only way.
And chanting, you mentioned that there was a certain chant which was involved. Was it also part of it?
And this is due to my recollection, but we chanted the Shivaya chant. You know this one, yeah?
Yeah. I think so. I mean,
yeah. So that's, we would chant that for, I think, like an hour and a half each day. I know he had told us not to do other chants, even to the fact of like the Bhairavi Stuti, we could only do it on full moons. The rest of the time, if you're doing your yantra practice, you just sit, palms open, while the Bhairavi Stuti happens. And some of this, like I said, this is my recollection. I'm pretty certain about those things that I just said, where the chants, there are people who remember it differently, but there are always people who kind of take liberties. I've always been someone who, if you give me directions, I'm pretty clear on what the directions are to follow them.
I'm
relatively certain that these are what happened. And then we got sent back home after doing that. But
I want to jump into what you just said about people who go into certain, opening up your karmic warehouse leading to illnesses. I think recently I've gone through a phase in my life which has not all been sunshine and rainbows, but rather a lot of pain. And at the same time, I had people reach out to me saying that they are scared of immersing themselves into spiritual practices because they feared, Sadhguru say, when you churn up, and I'm quoting him here, I've written down this quote, when you churn up your inner life, certain dimensions of your karma come to the fore. At such junctures, it is possible to experience intense pain or discomfort. Of course, this could mean that you have contracted some ailment, but frequently this is just your past karma surfacing and manifesting itself in one way or another. So I was wondering, were you ever scared or hesitant when it comes to immersing yourself into spirituality because of hearing these stories, people are falling ill, getting certain diseases? Or what would you say to somebody who is scared of immersing themselves because they might fear that they will lose all connections to the family, they might fall ill?
It's good to approach it with a little bit of fear wouldn't be the right word, a little bit of just caution, like understanding fully what you get into, because even he talks about that. Like you do Shambhavi. Shambhavi's done well. It's doing well for you. Great. You do BSP. BSP is doing well for you. It's a whole different thing when you start stepping into, say, Samyama and those sorts of things. And you can see it. Like you can see it. People think that, oh, I did BSP and had a big experience. Samyama is going to be an even bigger experience. But it's a different thing. Like for me, there's a difference between I want to make my life a little better. I want to experience a couple things. If that's what you want, great. Do Shambhavi, do some Hatha practices, do BSP, and just stay there. Like I had a good friend who basically, he told me, he's like, I have no interest in enlightenment. I have no interest in, these sorts of things. But somebody convinced him to go do Samyama. And his life kind of took a turn for the worse. And he just got angry about the whole thing. He's no longer involved with Isha. He won't talk with anybody in Isha. And for me, like the person that told him to do that, I told him afterwards, I was like, because he didn't tell me, he told me this afterwards. And I said, why did Shambhavi worked wonders for you? It's been beautiful for you. Like, stay there for a while. You're in such a place. He was going to the hospital. They told him to wrap his affairs up. He was in such a place that if you have no real questions, if you don't have that thing that's burning within you that says, this life, what the hell is it? Right? Like, it doesn't let you sit still. Why open that door? Maybe it'll come eventually. But if you don't have that question that needs to be answered, the struggle is, to me, you can't justify the struggle. Because it is struggle, right? It is if you are going towards the destructive element of spirituality. And what I mean by that is, and this is all my framing of it, so I don't present what I think of as any underlying truth. It's just how I look at it. But so Shambhavi takes my life, you're a little better, you're a little happier, you're a little calmer, you're more at peace. It's constructive, right? It's adding things to your life. But if you're really trying to destroy the limited aspect of who you are, to touch something deeper, to know something more about life, that death isn't metaphorical. Like there's times where you feel like you're dying. There's times where you recognize that you as you know it are dying, right? You as you know it are threatened. And so I think the fear is a rational response, but I also think that some people tend to play up certain things. Look at me, I'm spiritual. Look at me, it's this. Look at me, things are falling apart. Whereas that's not really what it should be. Like you should never, in my opinion, it should never be, I'm struggling, I'm gonna take this out on you. It should be, I'm struggling. If I'm in a relationship, I'm gonna look at you and say, listen, I'm going through a really hard time right now. This isn't on you, but I'm going to let you know that I'm going through all this right now. And so you're being open and honest. If that relationship is important to you, if the things are important to you, if the business is important to you, you do what you can. If you're somebody who can just say, forget the business, forget the wife, forget all those sorts of things, I can go live in a cave and beg for food, freaking great. That's amazing. I bow down to you. I'm not there. You know what I mean? Like, if you're okay with everything falling apart. So you have to learn how to manage it. And everybody's like, I want it to happen fast. Well, be careful what you ask for. It can be brutal. And you think you're going to go in these times of silence. Like, I went and did 40 days in silence, and I asked Sadhguru a question, and his response was, come do 40 days in silence. So be careful what you ask him. I went and I did 40 days in silence in 2022. I got home. Actually, I got out of silence, and I was like, oh, you know, it was this kind of intense, but it was kind of beautiful. And then my brother calls me and he has cancer. A week later, I get a call from a friend, and a mutual friend had killed himself. I go home, and within a week of coming home, certain family situations really hit the fan, like exploded. Then another friend commits suicide. And then I'm at the pool, and this guy that I've known for 7 or 8 years has a cardiac arrest, and I do CPR on him for 45 minutes before the ambulances come. They never revive him. And during this whole thing, I'm just kind of looking around like, what else? Right? Like, what else is going to happen? And I don't have the sense to look at it and say, that's my karma that this thing happened to those other people. I don't know. I just know I came home and went through a very, very difficult time, and it continued. It continued into the next year. Actually, at III, I was renting a room in a house from somebody who I've known for 15 years, and she and her husband are getting a divorce. I drop her off to go to India. I was up there on the weekends, and her husband decides he wants to put the house on Airbnb. It's a friend, so I don't have a contract. He's like, you need to get out. I was like, I already paid for this month. And he calls the cops and has me forcibly evicted from this house. And this is somebody who I've known for a long time, and he's sitting there yelling and cussing at me over the cops and doing this sort of stuff because he's struggling with some things. Like, he's going through his own issues, he's going through his own stuff. But you just, like, these things happen one after another. All these struggles around hatha yoga, teacher training, even getting into teacher training. I told people, I was like, I attract chaos. They laughed at me. And then they saw it. Like, you can ask some of the you just had these nutso situations happen where people would like that, and they laugh about it. If you are saying, yes, I want to accelerate things, if you're saying, yes, I want to do things, one thing is you need to really spend some time with your mind and your body for stability. Like, you really need to spend some time to get to where you're able to manage what's happening. And then you need to realize that, like, if I'm going 40 and I hit a speed bump, or if I'm going 20 kilometers per hour and I hit a speed bump, that's one thing. If I'm going 90, that speed bump's gonna, like, break the axle in the car. So I wouldn't have it any other way. If somebody told me what I was gonna go through, would I still do Anadi? Yes. Would I still be on the path that I had? Yes. But I don't have a wife. I don't have this. There are questions that have bothered me since I was young. Even in terms of stuff, like, it's funny because Sadhguru doesn't talk to me. You know, I've had friends where they have his phone number, he comes up and like, is this person? I remember there was one Darshan, and my good friend, and Sadhguru's sitting there, he's like, hey, is this person here? And, like, these are the people that I know, that I'm friends with. Even now I have friends that are, you know, he calls them up and this sort of stuff, and he just ignores me and always just kind of puts me into silence and that sort of stuff. But that being said, some of those friends that were really close with him are no longer around. Right. And I was talking with one of the ladies from Lebanon who was one of the original people, and I just happened to mention this to her. I was like, we were in Kailash, and it's kind of a funny story. We were in Kailash. I had some big experience. I didn't talk for 3 or 4 days. I start talking. We're sitting around at a dinner with him, and there's like, I'm sitting next to him. And sitting next to him for me was like sitting next to this generator, like humming. I just can't even, I'm just sitting and like conversations going on. And in my mind, I'm like, how are you guys talking? How are you guys formulating sentences? How are you not just like sitting here? So I'm sitting there, and this lady is just like, Joshua, how is silence? In my mind, I think, this guy, 3 lifetimes, right? what are my 5 days? They're nothing. You know what I mean? Like, how am I going to sit there and be like, well, let me tell you what I've learned and let me tell you who I know. I'm like, it's nothing next to this guy. And finally she's like, Joshua, how was silence? And I'm like, I just kind of sit there and the conversation's still going on, everybody. And finally she asked me one more time, and Sadhguru just looks at me, it's better when he's quiet. So that, all that being said, I think you approach it with some caution, but you also realize that when you come to certain truths about life, when you come to certain understandings that, I mean, so these are kind of paraphrasing what he says, but they're truth. Like, what you have will never be enough. Who you are will never be enough, right? Like, if you're looking at, I get this qualification, or I've done this, or I've done that, like, it's still not enough. I remember when I did my first Ironman and I finished, and I crossed the line, and like, Joshua Berwald, you are an Ironman. Yeah. And then I go home and I sleep. And I wake up the next day feeling good, and I hop on the bike to spin, because after something like that, you have to get all the lactic acid out, get all the toxins out. And I started to think about how I could be faster. And within 36 hours, I was planning my next race. That feeling lasted 36 hours. And I remember the first time I won a race, and I got to the finish line, and I was just like, this is great. And then I get the thing, and it's this, and it's that, and it was a much smaller race. And I got that, was the first on the podium, and did all these sorts of stuff. And then it literally lasted about an hour, and I was like, was that it? Is this what I'm spending all the time for? And if we sit down and look at our life, you know, this is why capitalism is failing, is because there's no point where you get to and it's enough, right? There's no point where I've got enough companies and it's enough. Like, I think Mark Zuckerberg is now getting into Muay Thai fighting and getting into this stuff. And I'm like, that's wonderful. Like, you do what you want to do, but you also should have some sense to say, even if whatever he does, if he conquers the MMA fighting, it won't be enough. He'll be like, what's next? And at some point you have to say, I'm just running the same loop. I'm just doing the same thing. Like, it's desire, work towards the desire, desire's culminated. Desire, work towards the desire, desire's culminated. So then you have the question, well, what exactly is going on here? And if that question is there, it's not a question that you can put to the side. It's not a question that you can step and say, oh, well, you know, I can just go get my med school degree, or I can do this, or I can do that, or get a nice car. It eats at you. And I think that's the point where you say, the pain is worth it because I need to know.
Yeah, I feel that there is a judgment that people have over that pain. They want it to be always blissful, always joyful, always beautiful, and they fear it to not be like that. So that's why people fear to immerse themselves into spirituality, because they are scared of pain. But the pain is actually, first of all, it's part of the human experience. Secondly, pain also leads to discomfort, which is a great place for growth. Because if you're always comfortable, always in a joyful, blissful state, then I feel growth is not as much. I feel that in pain, in discomfort, in difficult situations that life throws at you, the opportunity for growth is very, very big.
Yeah. I think that's an unfortunate truth, is that in joy, most people aren't going to look at it and say, what is this? In happiness and bliss, most people aren't going to look around and question this. It takes to where your joy falls apart. It takes to where you're kind of disillusioned and you say, okay, well, I thought this was it and it's not it. So what is it? And to paraphrase Sadhguru, he's like, that's at the point where, you know, the beginning of the Yoga Sutras, you've tried everything else and now yoga, right? And that's how it happened for me. I feel like I tried everything. I looked at everything. I tried to go everywhere my mind is. And I had this big experience at Shambhavi, but it's also been unwinding your mind and realizing, he's talked about how if you have a sharp mind, but it's pointed at yourself, you can do damage, right? I feel like that was me, is I had a pretty sharp mind growing up, and hopefully still, you know, but for my growth, for my family, for all that sort of stuff, my questions were not okay, like we were in this very, very conventional structure of how to do your life, what you should believe. I questioned those beliefs, not because I wasn't a rebel. That's what everybody thought. Everybody thought I was this rebel. And why do you always have to question? I'm like, I have questions. This isn't something that I'm being a rebel about. Like, I just want to know, you said this is true. Well, tell me about this, because if you think it's true, clearly you've looked at these things. And I realized that most people haven't. So I learned not to question, but over these years, and even in the last week, like we talked on the phone, I was calling, it's like, I'm actually a different person than I was when we talked, because certain things I was doing with my mind came to light, and I've been able to stop turning the knife on myself. I've been able to stop turning my mind on myself. So that being said, that's painful. Like if you use an analogy, like if I break my leg or if I have a cut open on my leg and it's gangrenous and stuff like that, if I just ignore my leg and hop around on one foot, that's one thing, right? But the first thing is coming to this sense of like, okay, I have this leg that's hurt, and accepting it and looking at those things rather than avoiding those things. And one of the
Mhm.
hard things about modern society is you have something to help distract you, and how much of our society is built around that distraction. I mean, all the entertainment, all the phone, all the computer, these things, people. There was a guy at Kailash with Sadhguru, right? And he's walking
Mm.
up. This is kind of a crazy story. I'll tell it. But he's walking up and he's got these headphones in. He's got these earbuds in. And he's walking up and he's just listening to his music as we're all walking in Tibet. Kailash is there. Sadhguru's here. Like, we're walking in this place. I don't care if you have zero spirituality to you, right? This is a phenomenal place. Like the plains, and you have these mountains with waterfalls over here, and you have this Tibetan monastery there. You have Kailash and the glacier, and it's just wide open. You're on top of the world at 16, 17,000 feet. Even if you have no sense of anything, you can look around and just kind of be like, we're part of something big. Like this existence is much bigger than me. And you can just kind of be quiet. Well, he's walking with his music, his going on. We get up. I don't know if you've seen the stuff, the pictures of Kailash where the sun is coming down, it just catches the tip of it and it's like lit up bright. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was ours. Guru said that most of the time there's clouds around it on our
Mm.
batch where, so it's the morning of our initiation and everybody's
Mhm.
just sitting around and it's bright. And I remember, once again, I hadn't talked in a couple days. Praveen, who was the teacher, says, Josh, can you go get everybody? We're going to do Guru Puja before we do our initiation. I was like, okay, in my head. But so I'm going up to people and I haven't talked. And this is when I had this, my first time at Kailash, I had this just crazy, crazy experience. First time I ever bowed down to something. So I'm in the midst of this crazy, crazy experience. If you're up for it at some point, we can do another talk if people want it or something like that. So I go up and I tap someone on the shoulder. I'm like, this way, that way, like, just please come, please come. So I go and I tap this guy on the shoulder and I went like that, like that. And he starts dropping the F bombs, like, you mother, if you touch me again, I will punch you. And I just look
Mm.
at him. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you and I are having very different experiences right now.
Mm.
Right? Like we are in a completely different place. And I just kind of look at him like this. He goes, you think I'm joking? Touch me again. Touch me again. He is trying to fight me in Kailash. Small group. It's Sadhguru. And I just look at him and I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I go over to where we're doing Guru Puja. Now the guy comes to me afterwards and he's just like, it's 2 or 3 days later when we're back in Masa. Josh, I didn't know you were in silence. Like, I'm sorry for the way I interacted and this and that. Part of me in my mind's like, why should it matter? Right?
Mm.
Why should it matter? I don't care if I'm some tuk-tuk driver on the street. Like, that's not really an appropriate reaction. But then,
Mhm.
he's at least coming to some sense. And I'm like, okay, thank you for that. Thank you for your apology. Like, I'm not going to hold it against you. All that being said, my point is that, having those questions, having that difficulty, we can make anything miserable. We can make anything miserable. I remember another guy on the trip, well, somehow lost his shoes and he has to walk the, like, I think it's 16 kilometers up Kailash in cheap flip-flops, but he's smiling and happy and having a great time as this kid Jack. He was just like happy about the whole thing. And so you, whatever it is, in a certain sense, learning to undo, taking the time and doing the sadhana, seeing where we're uncomfortable, seeing where those things are, and realizing that you see it, you feel it long before it goes away. So stepping into those uncomfortable places of, this is where my anger or my pain is. It's not a matter of like, let's just put bliss on top of that and live our lives. You have to step into that, feel it, see it, know it, even in many ways. And then it kind of like over time with awareness, it works its way out. Now, that being said, as I understand it, there's the devotional path where some of these things, the mental stuff, can just be bypassed. They're devotional. I've seen people like this. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And I wish I could do it. You know, I remember there's some people who just don't have the capacity for that type of devotion. And so Sadhguru, this is during Anadi actually. We were doing bhakti sadhana, and there's different forms of bhakti sadhana, but this was like you go around and you see everything as yourself. You see this chair as yourself. You see this camera as yourself. You see Stefan, right? Not Stephen, Stefan.
Stefan.
See Stefan as myself. You see all these things as yourself. And prior to Anadi, he put me in silence for a month. That's another funny story. And then I was in silence for 6 months, or I was in half day silence for 6 months. So I was over in India, and then I came home, and then we went to Anadi. So it was an interesting year and a half for me. But all that being said, is I had started looking at this shirt isn't my shirt. It's just something that I'm wearing. This phone isn't my phone. It's just something that I'm using. So that sense of my and mine was going away, and I struggled. I think it was about 2 or 3 days where I'm trying to look at everything and be like, this is my mat, this is my hall, this is my everything. And intellectually I could understand the exercise, but looking at it, I would look at the mat and be like, but that's not my mat. It's just something that's there that I'm using for a period. This isn't my hall. This is just something that's there that I'm in for a period. This isn't even really my body. Like, it'll go.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm struggling because he's like, if you're going to step into this, referring to the practices, referring to the Anadi practice, what we're going to get initiated. If you're going to step into this, you need devotion.
Mm.
You need to be able to walk like that. And so I raised my hand and I was just like, Sadhguru, I'm trying, right? I'm trying so hard. And it's because I'm like, I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss this whole thing because I don't have this devotion. And I was like, I'm looking around and you're saying, make everything mine. And I'm looking around and I have this clear sense of it's not mine. I have this clear sense. And I'm like, should I be just accept the fact that I'm lying to myself? Should I accept the fact, what should I be doing? Because I'm really trying to do this. And he just looks at me as he does for a long time. Felt like an hour, it's probably like 20 seconds. He just goes, that's a much harder path, right? So this idea that, yes, devotion is the sweetest path. Yes, we see all those Instagram devotees, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense. I'm saying the people who actually feel that way, this sort of stuff. And you can see some of them in the way they decorate stuff and the way they approach stuff. There were a few of them in our Hatha Yoga class, and I'm just like, you're beautiful. You're amazing. I wish I could be that. But then for most of us, like the sadhana and the wearing it down and step by step by step by step and feeling the pain and feeling all that sort of stuff and not being able to just give yourself, it takes time. It takes time, especially if you have a wound up mind and you're not able to fully separate. For the mind to unwind, it takes time. It takes time, it takes application. Even getting to the point where you can see the mind as something that I use, right? Even getting to the point where you can see that, it takes time. And the whole I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, that doesn't mean that the body won't hurt or the mind won't get confused. It just means, to me, I shouldn't give some, to me, it seems to be that I have some sense of myself that's separate. So even if you're going through what you're going through, you're realizing that it's not that I'm not that. So even up to death, right? You could be dying, you could be whatever, walking into that. That's not a. haven't done it, but I would assume it's not the most comfortable process. But developing that sense, it's taken me years to get here, that the goal is no matter what happens, I am okay. Right? And he said you should be in a space that no matter what happens, I am okay. But you're not there. So the process of getting there is going through all those times that I'm not okay. Right? And intellectually, we can get there. But recognizing that we can understand the truth, but not be living the truth. It's not our experience.
Can you say that again?
I said, understanding that I can understand the truth, but that doesn't mean I have an experience of the truth. I can understand what he's saying, but that doesn't mean I have an experience of it. And for me to get there and realize that putting aside all my concepts, putting aside all that sort of stuff, putting aside what I think is supposed to happen, it is scary. Like, it is scary because you're going into the unknown. And whenever you step into the unknown, there's fear. I've been doing this for 16 years. And like I said, a couple of things happened over the last week where I realize I am at the moment stepping into something that is completely and utterly unknown for me. There's fear. There's absolutely fear, especially over like, what is today? Today's Monday, especially I think it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. There was definitely like, I was unsettled. I was scared. And then I just realized that like, okay, I'm stepping into, I don't know if you ever played video games, but that area of the map that is darkness. Like you're stepping into that. Did you ever play video games?
Yes, yes, of course.
Right? So you have that area that's lit up that you've explored, and then you're like going into
Yeah.
this area that's darkness. So you're stepping into that. And unlike the video games, like the whole area doesn't open up. I think you step into the darkness, and then over time you begin to see. Like that's the hard thing. You step, and then you see. And of course that's going to create fear. Right?
Yeah, I
You have to
understand
either,
what you're saying.
yeah, you have to be
I
crazy
feel
or insane to not have fear.
Yeah, I mean, your mind in that sense has a fear because of wanting to live, wanting to survive. But at the same time, I hear a lot of acceptance in that. Like, accept the pain, be with the pain, don't ignore it, don't try to avoid the pain, don't try to distract yourself from the pain, be with the pain. And that acceptance is actually going to lead to you to process that pain and to come out in a different place than you are right now. So I think that's what I'm hearing.
And at the end of it, we're all going to get old. Well, hopefully, best case scenario, we get old and we die. So there's going to be pain. There's going to be discomfort. So the goal isn't to never feel pain or discomfort. The goal is to recognize that I want to get myself to a place where when that pain comes, when that discomfort comes, I can just be aware of it and go through it. And that's what happens. Like you do it with a certain equanimity, but that takes, like I said, that takes time and it takes application. My understanding. I think there are some people who just kind of jump the track and they're devotees and whatever happens, happens, and that's beautiful. You can't, how I always think of it with devotion is winning the lottery is a great thing. It's not a financial strategy, right? And that's how I look at devotion. Is some people win the lottery. That's wonderful. But you can't plan for that. You can't depend on that.
Yeah, but you can develop it. Like even devotion in that sense, I feel that you can develop it. I mean, that's why these practices are there, like bhakti sadhana. I do feel that bringing reverence and gratitude into your life, you can start to experience. I'm also more intellectual, but I do feel that, or living with somebody who is like my wife, she's more much more devotional. So even being surrounded by someone who is more into that path, if you can observe somebody, then you start to also mirror that. Yeah.
The way I kind of think of that is a little bit of their fragrance kind of makes its way over to you, right?
Yes.
So you can appreciate the fragrance. There's a couple people who I just am kind of in awe of with their devotion and the way they handle things and the way there's just a beauty to them in terms of, and I think the Bhakti sadhana does it. I think there's certain things that do it, but I say that only because I can see the effects of it within myself. I do Bhakti sadhana and I see why it's necessary for me to handle my mind, but do I get a joy from it or anything like that? I don't. And maybe things are happening on a level that I don't understand, possibly, but it's not something like you can't look at, say, Surya Kriya and say over time these things will happen if you do Surya Kriya over time, because you see it within yourself, you see it with other people. You can't, there's no like logical one-to-one ratio with Bhakti sadhana as to how that sort of stuff. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like, I think it's important to do. I think it's an important element, even within my own life, as even being told basically like that I'm on a different path. And he's told me different stuff like that. Last time I was in silence, he had me doing Bhakti sadhana. And so I think looking at that and seeing, even taking a moment of gratitude, that's one thing I'm trying to do, is take a moment with everything that I do and be like, rather than just doing it, just, okay, this is wonderful that I get to do this right now. This is amazing that I'm part of this right now. This is amazing that I try to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm alive. I'm part of this world, this vast, expansive thing. Because it just adds a touch of sweetness to who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it works. But like I said, jumping into devotion as a path rather than as part of a path,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something to me that you can plan for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you couldn't tomorrow be like, I'm going to wake up. What's your wife's name?
Akanksha.
Akanksha. Wonderful name. You couldn't wake up tomorrow morning and be like, I'm going to go through my day like Akanksha. Because you'd just be deceiving yourself, right? But you can
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
okay, there's certain elements that I want to bring into my life that are, you know, that little bit of extra spice in the meal that you like.
Hmm. Yeah, I understand what you mean. I can relate to it because I have a living example here and I can agree to what you just said. And there are different
Mm-hmm.
paths. It's not like the same
Yes.
path for everybody. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly there are. So yeah, that's kind of my story. Is this a good place to kind of wrap up for now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can, if you're interested, we could
Anybody is
touch on,
interested who is listening. Yeah. If
yeah.
anybody who's listening is interested in hearing more about Kailash or the ayahuasca or the mystic musings
Hmm.
story, then
Oh, we
yeah.
didn't even get into that.
Yeah.
We didn't even get into Mystic Music. Maybe we'll do we could do like a little Sacred Walks one, because those are some wild stories. Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm very glad I had to laugh a lot. It's rare for me. I tend to, like, that's what happened with me after. Now, since I'm married, I'm slowly becoming more a child again. But the
Hmm.
sadhanapada and living at the ashram and the intensity of the practices, they make me very serious.
Mm.
So this conversation was really like, even whenever I tend to have a conversation with people from Isha, I always feel like there's such a seriousness to the conversation. So I'm extremely happy that this was just a joyful, friendly conversation between the two of us without any
It was
seriousness.
it was fun, and if I'll touch on that for a moment, what I've seen is that like at first you need that structure, right? Sadhanapada, hatha yoga. You get that structure, you get that discipline, and you have those like that seriousness, and you need that to take the steps forward. But
Mhm.
at some point, and I like to think of it as a scaffolding, right? It's a scaffolding that you build, but at some point the scaffolding can come down and you can still maintain the intent and you can still maintain that discipline, you can still do that, but you can be loose about it, right? And that's one of the beautiful things that's happened in my life recently. It's like,
Mhm.
so I was that triathlete who I knew where my heart rate was. I knew if I was at 80 mile 80 of the bike, my heart rate's spiking. I'm like, oh, I'm dehydrated. I need to take a salt tablet and take a drink. I knew where I was going to take my caffeine pills. Like all these things, like I had down. So when I first started approaching Isha, in Anadi, they called me the soldier, right? Because this.
Yeah.
And what I think is beautiful is that like I'm on my sadhana, it gets done, but I don't have to be like this, right? Like I can loosen the grip and still hold it. But at first you
Mm-hmm.
have something, right? You have this, you have to hold it tight you have to hold it tight. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually you learn to just hold it gently. You learn it and you have it. And so I think it's not anything, there's nothing wrong with being serious and being like that. But especially learning who you can relax and have fun with that isn't going to lose that sense of we're talking about subjects that are you have to approach like this, right? You're talking about a lot of people, and you see that. I saw that in Hatha Yoga teacher training. If you get that laxity, if you put that looseness, people will just go crazy and do stupid stuff. You probably saw it in Sadhanapada. Once they
Mm-hmm.
loosened up, people were off doing this sort of stuff. I love the
Yeah.
Sadhanapada boys, but I remember I was serving, and at one point I counted, and some guy got 16 slices of watermelon. And I'm like, oh, you poor thing, right? Like people will just do wild, crazy stuff. They don't even know why. And so you have to keep it like this. But then once you start
Mm-hmm.
getting with people where you don't keep it like this, where you can be loose, or you can be like relaxed, but still
Mm-hmm.
have that structure because they no longer need the structure. That's where like the joy and the fun and the like the beauty of what we're doing comes through is you can dance through it rather than like marching through it.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. That gave me also clarity on not being judgmental about my own way of starting the journey, of how I approached it, and maybe also when I
Mm-hmm.
talk to people who are very serious, that I can look at it and see, okay, that's not always a bad thing. Yeah,
Mm-mm.
thank you for
It's
that.
not because even within yourself, you can probably see that there's certain things that you have to, in your mind, be strict about, or they don't happen,
Hmm.
right? Like you have to be like this about what you have to hold yourself like this. But there's probably things that you used to have to be like that, where you're just like, okay, well, this just happens, like this just is part of life now. It's part of
Hmm.
breathing, so I don't have to be like that. And realizing that you get there and you have to learn that structure. You have to learn exactly how to do it before that structure relaxes. And it is an unfortunate thing that most people I remember we were doing 2 times a day practices, morning and evening practices in Hatha Yoga. And in the last couple of weeks, it got really busy. So the evening practices became optional. And how many people dropped it like that? Just gone. No thought. It was because the structure was there. And not judging them, but realizing that for me, I've done two practice, morning and evening for basically 10 years. So I was just like, when's the next time we're going to be in the Alayam and have this opportunity to do sadhana in here? For me, I'm going to drink this in. But so, yeah, like not judging people who need that structure, who need that right now, who need the walls around them to make sure they don't jump off a cliff or whatever it is.
Mm.
And it's better for it's safer for a lot of people to have structure.
Yeah.
Like I've gone without structure and I've gone and done some dumb stuff here and there. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Well,
This,
again,
this has been
thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.